The wind had a voice on the Wyoming plains, low, endless, and lonely. It howled through the dry grass, carried dust across the broken fence posts, and whispered through the bones of the old ranch house. The man who lived there, Eli Grant, had grown used to talking back to it for 12 years. Eli had lived alone on his land, Grant's Hollow, a forgotten stretch of prairie once alive with cattle and laughter. Now it was only Eli, his weathered horse, and the ghosts of the past. He wasn't always a hermit. Once he had a wife. Once he had dreams. But the frontier had a way of breaking men who cared too much. One cold winter, his wife fell ill, and by spring, the land had taken her to. Since then, Eli stopped praying, stopped hoping. He lived only to keep the ranch standing, maybe out of habit, maybe out of guilt. Each dawn, he saddled his horse and rode the fence lines. The world was empty, but in that silence, he found a strange peace. The coyotes' cry at night, the crackle of his fire, those were his companions. And sometimes, when the loneliness grew unbearable, he'd talk to the wind as if it were an old friend. "Ain't much left, huh?" he'd mutter, staring at the dying sun. "But I reckon that's the way the West likes it, quiet." But something changed that summer. It began with the sound of hooves, faint, distant, out of rhythm with the wind. Eli thought it was his imagination until he saw them, 6 riders cresting the far hill, the sunset at their backs. The light caught their hair, their coats, and for a moment they looked like mirages, angels made of dust and fire. He narrowed his eyes. Women, 6 of them, riding fast, heading straight for his land. That alone was strange. Women didn't travel the frontier like that. Not unguarded, not in these parts. Eli's hand drifted toward the rifle by the porch. Instinct, not fear. The West taught every man to be ready for trouble, especially when trouble looked beautiful. They reined their horses in at the gate. The eldest, a tall woman with storm-gray eyes, dismounted first. Her clothes were torn by the road, her face streaked with dust. But there was pride in her stance. "We're not here for harm," she said. "We're looking for shelter." Eli didn't speak at first. He studied them, saw exhaustion, fear, and something deeper, a secret they were hiding. "Ain't much of a place for company," he finally said. "We'll take what's offered," the woman replied. "And if not?" Eli asked. "Then we'll die out there," she said simply, glancing at the horizon. For the first time in years, Eli felt something stir in him, the ache of empathy. He opened the gate. "Water's by the well," he said quietly. "You can rest your horses." As the 6 women dismounted, kneeling beside the trough, the wind shifted. It whispered through the dry grass like it carried a secret, something that had waited a long time to return. Eli didn't know it yet, but that night would mark the end of his solitude. The West was about to awaken ghosts he thought were long buried. The sun sank low behind the ridges, painting the land in red and gold. By the time the stars came out, Eli's ranch was alive again for the first time in a decade. The 6 women had brought the sounds of life back with them, the clatter of pots, quiet laughter, and the rustle of dresses against the dry wind. Eli sat on the porch, a cigar smoldering between his fingers. He watched them move around the firelight, cautious, graceful, and alert. Like deer who'd learned to trust no hunter. They'd told him their names over supper. The guide leader was Clara, a woman of few words and sharp instincts. The others, May, Ruth, Lila, Nora, and Belle looked younger, their hands rough from travel, their faces shadowed by exhaustion. Eli had offered them shelter for the night, just the barn and a bit of stew. But as the hours passed, something about their silence gnawed at him. They weren't just wanderers. The West was full of drifters, but these women carried attention, like they were running from something more than hunger. He took a slow drag from his cigar and asked, "So where you all headed?" Clara looked up from the fire, eyes cold and unreadable. "Nowhere in particular." "Nowhere's a long ride," Eli muttered. "Then we'll ride it," she said, her voice steady. The others exchanged glances, small, nervous looks that told Eli the truth. There was a story here, a dark one. After a long silence, Belle spoke up, her voice soft but trembling. "We were with a wagon train, heading to California, but—" Clara's glare cut her sentence short. Eli noticed it, the unspoken warning. The way Belle's hand tightened on her skirt. He decided not to push. "Ain't my business," he said quietly. "You're safe here for the night." The wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain. Distant thunder rolled over the hills, low and threatening as the storm gathered. The women led their horses into the barn. Eli helped, lighting the lanterns, his weathered hands steady from years of routine. The horses snorted nervously. Animals always sensed what men could not. When the rain finally came, it fell hard, hammering against the tin roof, drumming against the windows. Inside, the fire crackled, casting warm light on faces that had forgotten what safety felt like. Eli poured himself a cup of coffee and leaned by the window. Clara stood by the fire, her hand resting on a revolver at her hip. "You expecting someone?" he asked. "Always," she said. Her tone was final. That was the end of the conversation. But just before midnight, Eli heard it, faint, over the rain. HOOFBEATS. Slow, heavy. More than one rider. He moved to the porch, peering into the dark storm. The lightning flashed for a split second. He saw them. 3 riders, men. He turned back toward the house, his voice low but sharp. "Clara." She was already standing, gun in hand. "They found us," she whispered. The other women froze. Fear rippled through the room like a cold wind. Eli stepped outside, the rain soaking his hat, his boots sinking into the mud. He hadn't picked a fight in years. But the West had a way of waking old instincts. When the next flash of lightning came, he saw the truth. The riders were armed, and they were heading straight for his ranch. And suddenly, Eli Grant realized, whatever those 6 women had brought to his land, it wasn't peace, it was war. The thunder rolled low across the valley as Eli stepped into the storm. Rain soaked his duster coat, and the mud clung heavy to his boots. The lantern light from the porch barely reached past the gate, but he could see enough 3 silhouettes on horseback, slow and deliberate, coming closer with every clap of thunder behind him. The door creaked open. Clara stepped out, revolver in hand, the firelight from the cabin flickering against her pale face. "You know them?" Eli asked, his voice calm but firm. Clara's jaw tightened. "Yes," she said, "and they're not here to talk." Eli's fingers brushed against the old rifle leaning by the door, his father's Winchester, oiled and loaded since the days when this land still had law. "Then I reckon we better talk first," he muttered. The riders stopped 20 yards out. Lightning flashed again, and for a heartbeat, Eli saw their faces cruel. Hard-eyed men dressed in trail dust and black hats. The kind of men who took what they wanted and buried what they couldn't. The one in front grinned. "Evenin', folks," he called, voice slick as oil. "Name's Colt Maddox. You got something of mine." Clara's breath caught. "We don't have anything of yours," she shouted back. "You got plenty, sweetheart," Colt said, laughing. "6 of my girls, gone and run off with my money, my horses, and my temper. I've been chasing M3 states, and it ends tonight." Eli looked at Clara, saw the truth in her eyes before she spoke it. These weren't ordinary travelers. They were runaways from a man who made his own law out on the frontier. "You brought outlaws to my land," Eli said quietly. "We didn't have a choice," Clara replied. "He owned us, Mr. Grant. We just wanted to be free." Something in her voice, that raw, desperate honesty, struck a nerve deep inside Eli. He'd buried enough ghosts to know what pain looked like. Colt spat into the mud. "Hand 'em over. Old man, you do that, and I'll let your place stand." Eli's thumb slid over the hammer of his rifle. The years melted away. The quiet rancher became the gunslinger he once was. "You boys ride on," he said, voice low as the thunder. "Ain't nothing for you here." The silence that followed was long and dangerous. Then Colt smirked. "Suit yourself." The first gunshot cracked through the rain. Eli fired back before the echo faded, his bullet shattering a rider's lantern and sending the horses screaming. Clara ducked for cover beside the porch, firing twice into the dark. Muzzle flashes lit up the storm like lightning made of fire and lead. Inside the cabin, the other women loaded rifles, trembling but steady. Belle pulled back the hammer with shaking hands. "We can't let them take us," she whispered. The gunfight raged for minutes that felt like hours. Each flash of light revealed another glimpse, Eli reloading in the mud, Clara standing firm beside him, the rain washing the blood from the porch. Finally, when the thunder faded, only one horse remained. Colt Maddox sat slumped in his saddle, clutching his shoulder, eyes full of hate. "This ain't over," he snarled. "You'll regret crossing me, old man." Eli stepped forward, rain dripping from the brim of his hat. "Then come back when you're ready to die proper." Colt spat again, wheeled his horse, and vanished into the dark. The storm moved on, leaving the world quiet once more. The women stood in the doorway, soaked, shaken, but alive. Clara looked at Eli, the man who had just risked his life for strangers. "You didn't have to help us," she said softly. "Maybe I did," he replied. "Seems the West ain't done testing me yet." And as dawn broke across the horizon, the wind carried a promise. This was only the beginning. The next morning broke, gray and silent. The rain had washed the world clean, but the scent of gunpowder still clung to the air. A trail of spent shells glittered in the mud like tiny pieces of brass regret. Eli stood at the fence line, hat in hand, watching the valley below. The night had left him sore and sleepless, his mind heavy with questions. He'd spent 12 years talking to ghosts, but now the living had come crashing into his solitude, and they'd brought hell riding behind them. Inside the cabin, Clara and the others sat by the fire, their faces pale under the morning light. Ruth's arm was bandaged, grazed by a bullet. Lila stirred a pot of coffee in silence. The storm had passed, but fear hadn't. Eli stepped inside, his boots creaking against the old wood floor. "He'll be back," he said simply. Clara nodded. "Colt Maddox doesn't forgive. He takes. So what was he talkin' from you in the first place?" Eli asked. Clara hesitated. Her gray eyes shifted toward the others. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Belle rose, trembling, and said what the rest wouldn't. "He owned a saloon down in Red Creek. The girls there, weren't he free? He said he'd buy our passage west, but it was a lie. We were just his property, till Clara shot his brother and we ran." The words hung heavy in the smoky air. Eli took a slow breath, feeling the old anger stir in his chest. He knew men like Colt Maddox, men who believed the West belonged only to those cruel enough to claim it. "You did right," he said. "But runnin' won't be enough. He'll come back with more." Clara's eyes met his. "Then we need to disappear before he does." Eli frowned. "Disappear where?" "He'll burn every ranch between here and Red Creek lookin' for you." Ruth spoke up quietly. "There's a place," she said. "Something Clara found. Something under this ranch." Eli's brow furrowed. Leela moved to the corner of the cabin and lifted one of the floorboards. Beneath it, in the dirt, lay an old wooden crate, sealed, weathered, and carved with strange initials. H.G. Eli knelt down, heart thudding. He hadn't seen that mark in 20 years. "Where did you find this?" he asked, voice barely a whisper. "Yesterday," Clara said, "when we went for water. We thought it might be something you buried long ago." Eli pried it open with his knife. Inside were bags of gold dust, wrapped in oilskin, and sealed tight relics from a time before the war, before he'd lost everything. He sat back, staring in disbelief. The box wasn't just gold, it was his father's legacy, hidden away when the ranch was built. He'd forgotten it existed. Clara looked at him. "That's enough to buy freedom. For all of us." Eli's jaw clenched. "And enough to bring Maddox back with an army." The room fell silent again. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters like a warning. Eli stood, his voice hard now. "We can't run anymore. You wanted a place to stand. Well, this is it. Grant's Hollow's seen ghosts and storms. It can face one more devil." Clara rose beside him. Her eyes burned with something fierce, not fear, but resolve. "Then we fight." Eli nodded once. "Then we fight." As the sun fell behind the ridge that evening, the ranchers prepared for war. And far out on the trail, Colt Maddox rode again, 50 men behind him, dust rising like smoke from the mouth of hell. By dusk, the wind had gone still, the kind of stillness that comes before death. The sky burned orange over the Wyoming plains, and the air carried the distant rumble of hooves. Eli stood on the porch, rifle across his chest, watching the horizon turn to fire. Behind him, the women prepared what they could, boarding the windows, loading every gun they had, and whispering prayers they'd long forgotten. There was no running now. Not anymore. The gold beneath the floorboards had changed everything. Not just for them, but for the man who'd buried his heart with his past. For the first time in 12 years, Eli Grant had something to fight for. The dust cloud grew larger until it swallowed the setting sun. 50 riders, Colt Maddox at the front, his black hat low, his wounded arms strapped tight, his smile full of venom. He called out as he approached, his voice echoing through the hollow like thunder. "I told you I'd be back, old man. You can't hide what's mine." Eli stepped forward, calm and unflinching. Ain't nothing here that belongs to you. Maddox, not gold, not land, not people. Maddox laughed. We'll see about that. He raised his hand, and the riders fanned out in a semicircle around the ranch. The women watched from the windows, hands trembling but eyes steady. Clara stood beside Eli, revolver drawn, her gray eyes sharp as steel. You don't have to stay, Eli told her. And leave you to die alone, she said. We're done running. Eli gave a faint smile. Good, then let's make this place worth dying for. The first shot came just as the sun slipped below the horizon. Gunfire erupted like a storm, loud, chaotic, and merciless. The air filled with smoke and the sharp scent of gunpowder. Eli moved like a man half his age, steady, cold, and precise. Every shot he fired found its mark. From the upper windows, May and Ruth rained bullets down on the riders below, their cries mixing with the wind. Bell tossed another cartridge belt to Eli. They're circling to the barn. He nodded and sprinted through the mud, the storm of lead following him. At the barn, 2 riders kicked down the gate. Eli dropped one before he could raise his gun, and Clara shot the other clean through the heart. Inside, the horses screamed. Sparks flew from a lantern, catching the hay. Fire spread fast. Eli, Clara shouted. The barn. He turned, coughing through the smoke, and cut the horses loose. They bolted into the night just as the roof came down in flames. When he stumbled back to the house, his coat scorched and his breath ragged, Colt Maddox was already waiting, rifle in hand. Smile cruel and wide. You should have stayed dead, old man. Colt sneered. Eli dropped his empty rifle and drew the revolver from his hip. Maybe, he said, but I've got ghosts that won't let me. They fired at the same time. The echo rolled through the hollow, long and final. When the smoke cleared, Colt lay face down in the mud, the rain beginning to fall once more. Eli stood over him, breathing heavy, his revolver still smoking. The remaining riders turned and fled into the storm. The fire burned behind them, painting the night in red and gold. By morning only ashes remained where the barn had stood. The women buried the dead at the ridge, 6 crosses for strangers who'd found their freedom in one man's courage. Clara stood beside Eli, her hand brushing his arm. What will you do now? She asked. He looked across the valley, the dawn light catching his weathered face. Rebuild, he said. Maybe start living again. Clara smiled softly. Then you won't be alone this time. Eli nodded, eyes on the rising sun. The wind stirred the grass, whispering through the empty land like a blessing. Grant's hollow, once a place of silence, had found its voice again, and the man who spoke to the wind finally had someone to listen.